Putin, as they say, is afraid, expecting a palace coup. That's what his aides are saying. And in Russia, a resistance movement is slowly beginning, maturing, and unfolding. After the Federal Security Service, with Navalny's help, dealt with all the opposition movements, and then by removing Navalny himself, decapitated them. The only person in the world who, according to the Kremlin, was the main and systemic opponent of Putin, and whom Putin, for some completely unclear reason, was very afraid of. But when there was no opposition left in Russia, it became absolutely clear that if not you, then who else would actually fight against you? There is no one else left, so it's either you yourself or no one.
No tovar, no tovar, no tovar, no tovar.
Political analysts disagree on why the Kremlin started the war with Ukraine. Opinions range from saying that Putin wanted to restore the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics to saying he didn't want to fight, but Ukraine provoked it and the United States pushed him. Is that true or not? Well, I don't know, to be honest. Probably someday someone from Putin's circle will write memoirs, but as they say, it's still up in the air. Some will tell the truth, some won't.
Russian youth are taking to the streets, chanting anti-war slogans and demanding a change of regime. Stores across the country are experiencing food shortages, bringing back the scarcity of the Soviet era. Even the staunchest supporters of this war are protesting against Putin's decision. This economic collapse is a threat that Putin cannot bomb, ban, or avoid. Putin is running out of time and will soon realize his real enemy isn't NATO, but gravity. You see, the biggest challenge to Putin's rule began yesterday, when Russian youth started gathering in St. Petersburg to sing an anti-war song that Putin himself banned in Russia. Listen to this yourself, and then we'll talk about why Putin is so afraid.
Among the lyrics of the song are lines like the song, "The Tsar will die, we will be able to dance again," or "Where have you been for the last 8 years? You," then an offensive epithet. The song, monster, epithet, epithet, epithet. Hey, you, old man in the bunker, you're holding onto the throne with your old hand. You think it's 1985?
So, it's not just an anti-war song, it openly calls for regime change in Russia, and that's exactly why Putin is afraid of it. In fact, in 2023, when the song was released, Putin immediately banned it. The rapper who actually wrote it was forced to leave the country because Putin was persecuting him. Let's break down the lyrics a bit, because if you love history, this is a real treasure.
Now they'll translate the meaning of this lyrical poem for us.
The song is called Cooperative Swan Lake, and the chorus, which we just heard in the clip, basically translates as, "I want to watch ballet, let the swans dance." Now, the mention of swans actually refers to the famous classical Russian piece Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky. But for many Russians, especially those who lived in the Soviet Union, this song has a different meaning. You see, in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, whenever the government had bad news, this song would play on a loop on every television in the Soviet Union. They played this song when Brezhnev died. They played this song when his successor Chernenko died. And they played this song when his successor Andropov died. But most Russians remember this song from 1991. In August of that year, this song started playing on Pathos. It repeated for no apparent reason. People knew that this meant bad news, but most Russians assumed that either Gorbachev had died or someone important had died. But that wasn't the case. While the song played over and over, tanks were moving through the streets of Moscow. A coup was taking place.
Swan Lake was broadcast when it was unclear who would win the war of elders in the Politburo and the Central Committee, and usually for 2 or 3 days. Tchaikovsky, so to speak. And people would find out that they had new relics to pray to. Swan Lake.
Swan Lake, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, many Russians once again want a change of regime. That's exactly what this song calls for, and that's exactly why Putin banned it. But now Russian youth are singing it in the center of St. Petersburg, and here...
Another source. Military analysis. 2 million subscribers.
Song
has always been one of the most powerful forms of opposition. It's a way to use art to express true feelings. And from a political perspective, music has always had the power to express what thousands, if not millions of people are thinking. And of course, Vladimir Putin recently got a good dose of what many people in his country are thinking. St. Petersburg erupted in protest. Hundreds of people sang a certain song so that Putin would hear their voices. The Russian president is now paranoid. Putin is terrified that a coup is inevitable as he sees his control over the Russian people weakening. On October 15, The Telegraph reported that hundreds of people, mostly Russian youth, gathered in St. Petersburg to start a protest against Putin and his Kremlin cronies. These protesters had a very specific message, expressed through the song they chose. It's time to remove Putin so a new leader can guide Russia differently. The protest was one of the rare occasions when public dissent occurred in Crimea, in a major Russian city, which shows how determined the protesters are. They live in a country where speaking out against Putin now carries the risk of severe punishment. But they gathered in large numbers along with street musicians on October 14 to protest against the very law that could lead to their punishment. The new draconian censorship law in Russia, which effectively declares any anti-war materials extremist. The Kremlin's goal is to silence any dissenting voices. After all, if Russians don't hear dissent, they're more likely to support Putin's policies, whether it's the gangs or the Kremlin itself. Suppressing opposing viewpoints is becoming more common in Russia. However, even Putin couldn't silence the masses who protested using the song by Noise Master of Ceremonies. The Russian leader can't expect the protest to stay in one city or go unnoticed across Russia. There is footage, and it shows a crowd ready to stand up and fight for their beliefs.
The video published by Telewizja Polska World lasts 2 minutes and shows many people gathered in the center of St. Petersburg. The previous generation didn't know how to bypass censorship on the internet. This generation does. But what's striking is something else. Young people don't wear masks when they go out on the streets, even though they know they'll be filmed.
These are people who not only want their voices to be heard, they also want their faces to be seen. Few masks can be seen in the crowd, showing their notable lack of fear about a possible Kremlin response. The crowd jumps and sings while many record the event on their phones. Putin can't suppress this protest. These images are already spreading worldwide and in Russia. Telewizja Polska World explains that Russia can no longer stop the spread of Noise MC's messages. His work is banned on all platforms controlled by Russia. The publication reports that Russia's tech-savvy youth still access it using VPNs. Russians can still access music Putin opposes on YouTube, and millions are doing so. The Noise MC channel on YouTube highlights this, as many of its music videos have each gained several million views. Many of these views come from, despite all of Putin's efforts to stop it,
It's striking. They don't cover their faces. Either they don't get it or they're no longer afraid. Perhaps after the deaths of 1 million of their peers, it seems to them that it's better to go to prison than to go to the front.
On July 25, Deutsche Welle reported that the Russian parliament approved a new law allowing Russia to fine citizens who access online content that the Russian state considers extremist. What exactly is considered extremist content remains unclear. Meanwhile, the Kremlin published a list with over 5,000 items. This implies the Kremlin plans to use the new law to suppress any hint of opposition to Putin. The new law lets Russia punish those promoting VPNs, aiming to tighten its control over online content. People like Noise Master of Ceremonies will never be able to reach Russians who don't have access to a VPN. Those who are brave enough to watch his videos online without a VPN will face fines of up to $64 for the violation. It might not seem like much, but in a country where the average salary is just over $1,050 a month, $64 is significant. That's a lot of money that could be spent just for watching a music video or a brochure containing something that Putin doesn't like. Putin wants to silence all dissent, but October 14 proves that he can't. Russia's leader is growing more paranoid about an inevitable coup, as shown by recent Kremlin actions.
The Kremlin acted the same day as the St. Petersburg protest. Who are they afraid of?
Putin. On October 14, the New York Times reported that the Russian Federal Security Service, or Federal Security Service, announced a new series of terrorism investigations against about 24 anti-war Russians. The Federal Security Service said it would investigate the Russian Anti-War Committee, which it claimed was planning to overthrow the government. This committee, founded by exiled anti-Kremlin oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky, includes politicians, law professors, and other professionals who either fled or were expelled from Russia after Putin began his invasion of Ukraine. Putin fears this group so much that the Federal Security Service claims the Russian Anti-War Committee is attempting to seize power and change Russia's constitutional order by force. How is the group doing this? The Federal Security Service claims that it is funding Ukraine's military efforts and recruiting people who are still in Russia to act on its behalf. Something interesting is happening with the timing. Within hours of the Federal Security Service investigation beginning, there was a protest that strongly called for Putin's overthrow. Currently, there appears to be no clear link between the new Federal Security Service operation and the protest. But Putin will have to ask himself a few questions. Is there a connection? Did the Russian Anti-War Committee help organize this protest? If so, does that mean the Federal Security Service investigation has failed? Even before it began, Putin may never find out the answers. Putin is losing himself due to paranoia. The October 14 protests give him more reasons to worry for several reasons. First, the second reason is that the very fact these protests are taking place highlights how poorly the Kremlin is doing at preventing information from reaching those in Russia who are willing to look for it. Russia may be trying to eliminate VPNs, but people are still using them. It tries to silence artists like Noise Master of Ceremonies, but people still listen. If the attempt to suppress dissent is the main symptom of Putin's paranoia, then his failure to achieve this goal will only make that paranoia worse. Right now, anti-war sentiment is starting to grow inside Russia after the Federal Security Service announced the dispersal of the Russian Anti-War Committee. Khodorkovsky turned to IKS to explain why Putin ordered an investigation. The threat we really pose to Putin comes from our function as an alternative source of legitimacy, Khodorkovsky wrote. If our work rattled him that much, our approach must be right. Shook up might even be an understatement. Putin is so consumed by the need to eliminate any dissent that his facade is starting to crack. Many Russians are beginning to see weakness in their once strong man of their politics.
From singing songs in the streets to an uprising is quite a leap, I would say. But for a chicken to appear, you first need eggs, then a chick, and only then the very hen that ended up in the coop. Today, Trump spoke with Putin. This conversation took place before his meeting with Zelensky, and naturally they discussed the war in Ukraine and tomahawks.
President Trump said on Truth Social that he is currently speaking on the phone with Vladimir Putin from Russia. He says, quote, "I am currently speaking with President Putin. The conversation is ongoing, it's lengthy, and I will report on its content, as will President Putin once it is finished. Thank you for your attention to this matter. We know this call is happening on the eve of President Trump's scheduled White House meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader urges President Trump to sell Tomahawk missiles to Kyiv, enabling deeper Ukrainian strikes.
The United States has warned Russia to stop the war in Ukraine, or else they will respond in ways that are available only to the United States. The threat was issued just before the meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, tomorrow as the President of the United States seeks to bring peace to yet another region devastated by conflict.
At the NATO summit in Brussels, the main topic is defense, as the members of the alliance announced the start of work on a drone wall to counter Russia. Also about allocating billions more in military aid to Ukraine.
NATO is a defensive alliance. It will remain a defensive alliance, but make no mistake, this defensive alliance is ready and willing to do whatever is necessary to ensure the security of our 1 billion people.
But the United States has gone on the offensive, threatening to impose sanctions on Russia if it does not stop the war in Ukraine.
The United States Department of Defense is ready to do its part as only the United States can.
So, as soon as the United States... well, in terms of the military, yes, only we can do it. What is this?
What is this? President Trump spoke about the possible use of Tomahawk missiles on Monday.
Listen, they really need Patriots. They would like to get Tomahawks. It's a step forward. They would like to get Tomahawks. We talked about it. I might have to talk to Russia, honestly, about the Tomahawks. Do they want Tomahawks flying in their direction? I don't think so. I can say, listen, if this war isn't settled, I'll send them Tomahawks. I can do that.
Say that. Sending Tomahawks to the Ukrainians who are asking for them to strike deeper into
Russia. But let's discuss this briefly. Putin says this is an escalation. That's another false statement. This man has made one false statement after another. In 2022, Putin began launching hypersonic ballistic missiles at Ukraine, mainly targeting civilians. He has been launching cruise missiles from the air and from the sea at civilian targets and energy infrastructure for more than 2 years now. In addition to those 500, 600 drones per night that you see there, he is the one who escalated everything, with most of his targets being civilian. If Ukraine gets Tomahawk missiles, what will they use them for? Their number one target will be the Belogoritsky production center for Shahed missiles, built by Ukraine. There are 20,000 North Koreans at this production center. BR, even it's unreachable. This will be the number one target, but all targets will be military. Ukraine will not target any civilian facility. And what Putin is trying to do with President Trump is the same thing he successfully did with Biden. Threaten escalation if you do X, and as a result, there will be something against you. And he kept winning this bluff with Biden over and over again. I don't think he'll win it with the president.
Trump. Zelensky expressed hope in light of what he saw in Gaza that this might lead to something different. Geopolitically, with a win, as seen in the Middle East. For President Trump, this will affect Russia. Will it affect China and their perception?
The situation. Oh yes, like weakness affects them. The fact that they became so aggressive during the previous administration is because they considered American leadership weak and thought they could take advantage of it. And the facts confirmed it. The attack that President Trump ordered, a decisive strike on nuclear facilities, got their attention. So yes, in Iran, what is happening right now with some setbacks for Iran and its proxies, and the movement toward peace and stability in the region, all of this is organized by whom? By American leadership on the world stage, setting the standard for what needs to be accomplished. That's what they're trying to overthrow. They want to have that influence, and here we have a president who is doing it. I'm sure they're paying attention.
Trump stopped a good half-dozen wars and conflicts around the world, and now he's focused on the war between Russia and Ukraine. What's happening there on the battlefield affects global politics. So what's going on there? Putin wants to conquer at any cost all those regions that he included in the Russian constitution.
Federation. Today, important news has come from the Pokrovsk direction. Here, the Russians have just launched one of their largest and most disastrous attacks of the entire war. A desperate attempt to break through Ukrainian lines and free their encircled forces. Their plan to catch the Ukrainians by surprise failed as Ukrainian units quickly coordinated to counter the threat. Geolocated Ukrainian drone footage shows them spotting the first Russian motorcycle group heading toward Volodymyrivka and quickly launching first-person view drones. The footage captures drones diving at the motorcyclists as they zigzagged across the muddy road. Some lost control, veered into ditches, and were blown up seconds later. Within minutes, the narrow road was filled with burning motorcycles, turning into a hellish scene that blocked the rest of the column. The Ukrainian artillerymen, who had previously marked out the road, then opened fire. Shell after shell fell among the wreckage, destroying the next waves of motorcyclists. The armored vehicles following them slowed down to avoid the chaos ahead. When the Ukrainian drones descended from above, the drones targeted the weakest spots of the armored personnel carriers, the tracks, the wheels, and the rear engine compartments. And one after another, they burst into flames. The infantry dismounted in panic, trying to find cover in the ruins of Vladimirivka, but they were pursued by new drones. Ukrainian operators dropped explosives directly into craters and trenches, killing anyone who was still moving. Those who sought shelter in the city in nearby buildings were struck by heavy octocopters carrying large munitions. Other drones finished off immobilized vehicles with precise strikes so they couldn't be restored later. The Russian offensive included 6 tanks, including 1 turtle tank, more than 40 armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles, over 40 motorcycles, and several hundred soldiers. Despite this unprecedented number of vehicles and soldiers, the scene quickly turned into yet another road of death. When the forward units broke up, the vehicles in the rear tried to turn around, creating a huge traffic jam, which made them easy targets for artillery and drones. Ukrainian intelligence confirmed that by nightfall, at least 3 Russian tanks, 16 armored vehicles, 41 motorcycles, and 2 additional cars had been destroyed. Preliminary reports counted more than 100 Russians killed and 50 wounded. Later, fighters from the Azov brigade reported that despite these losses, about 32 Russian infantrymen managed to land near Volodymyrivka, but 12 were killed almost instantly. The survivors hid in basements and rubble, but Ukrainian octocopters dropped heavy bombs on them all night, and by dawn, there was no more movement in the settlement. This large-scale attack was part of a desperate plan by the Russian command to open a supply route to their encircled forces near Dobropilya. After the explosion of the ammonia pipeline near Rusinev, Russian commanders hoped to take advantage of the resulting confusion and threat. Toxic ammonia gas moved west toward the Ukrainian ground line of communication, increasing risk for Ukrainian soldiers. However, in practice, this only meant that the Ukrainians couldn't quickly reinforce their presence in the city, while Ukrainian drone and artillery units remained unharmed and could respond. The Russians also believed bad weather would stop Ukrainians from using these drones. But, as the footage shows, operators from several brigades and artillery crews coordinated perfectly and saved the situation, turning the sky into a swarm of death for the Russian offensive. Each unit complemented the others, and when a vehicle survived one strike, a second drone was already approaching. Overall, the Russian waves of attacks near Volodymyrivka will go down in history as one of their most catastrophic failures near Pokrovsk. Even after blowing up the pipeline in a reckless attempt to distract Ukrainian forces and poison them with an ammonia cloud, their massive offensive ended in destruction. The smoldering wreckage scattered across the fields testified to the futility of attempts to overcome Ukrainian fortifications and dominance.
Of drones, that's why the Russians abandon units that are unprotected from the air. Because Putin desperately needs a victory, a series of victories, after which he can declare the end of the military operation, having accomplished all his objectives. But if there are no victories, then the silent resistance of the youth will turn into mass protests, riots, and probably shootings by Russian guards at residents of major cities, including St. Petersburg and maybe even Moscow. If there is no victory, Putin cannot stop the war. If Putin cannot stop the war, resistance within the country will grow, which means that more and more of Putin's buddies will think that by giving him up, they might avoid the end of their own lives. And everyone who thinks about it will decide that their own life is more important to them than the leader's life, and then to the leader. At best, he'll be sent to the island of Elba, and at worst, he'll take a ride through Moscow in a coffin and be thrown into a ditch to the delight of stray dogs and street kids. But swapping or rearranging the terms doesn't change the sum anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, so could this mean the end of the war for Ukraine? I think the new leadership will decide to keep what has already been captured and, so to speak, not go any further. But they are unlikely to go on the offensive while songs are being sung in St. Petersburg. And that's a good omen from the Lord. This seems to be the beginning of the slow end of the regime, although that end may still be a long, long way off. Gentlemen, under the video there is a little bell that I would ask you to find and click. This is an important moment for the channel, and out of almost 300,000 subscribers, only about 20,000 people have clicked the bell. That's very few, and it's really unhealthy for the channel's indexing. That's why I'm asking you, well, right now, as they say, click the bell, hit the bell so it rings.